And there's a lot of controversy still around fasting, but like the way that I think it's really interesting that there's so much controversy around it. And yet clearly we have genetics designed for being able to go without food. We have metabolism designed to go without food. Why is it that when we fast and we upregulate survival genes that literally improve, your cellular function, reduce, basically improve mitophagy and autophagy. Like if we didn't have these mechanisms in our body to even go into ketosis, like it just seems silly to me to say like fasting is not, like nobody should do it. It's like, well, we clearly have these metabolic pathways that demonstrate that there's benefits to it for some people and for some situations. And in general, I think that like almost every religion in the world has some fasting involved. So I think there's something to it and to our evolution that we adapted to be able to fast for a reason. And I think it's because it does potentially improve our survival.
Hey everyone, I'm super excited to have Dr. Molly Maloof. Me and Molly have known each other for a while, and she's been doing health optimization for quite some time. She's a physician and Stanford lecturer. She spent her career providing personalized medicine services to high-performing technology executives, billionaires, Silicon Valley entrepreneurs, award-winning actors. What she noticed is that women specifically were feeling the spark that once energized their lives beginning to dim, not just metaphorically, but an immeasurable reduction in energy output from their cells. In response, Dr. Molly developed a science-backed program focused on mitochondrial health, used successfully by her patients, which offered lifestyle changes that target the unique biology of women and provide immediate and long-term benefits. Now available in her book, The Spark Factor. The idea is a steady, gradual improvement, not perfection. The goal is to help you get your spark back so that you can spend the rest of your life empowered, alive, mobile, and resilient. So her book is The Spark Factor, Supercharge Your Batteries for Limitless Energy and a Fitter, Stronger, More Resilient Future, on sale January 31st. Molly, thanks for coming.
Thank you so much for having me.
Awesome. So, I did get some feedback that from some women actually that I don't discuss enough women's topics. Like, you're doing a lot of the things for yourself. You're a man. It's all interesting. How would this stuff impact women? So getting the perspective of women, I think, is important because you guys are 50% of the human race. And so I do think that, it turns out, I do think that most of the things are going to be very similar, but obviously there's some hormonal differences. And I definitely think getting the perspective of women and what works for women, somebody like Molly is the doctor. She's been in health for a long time. So really interested in getting your take on a bunch of different things, how you get to optimal health. What's your approach?
Yeah.
So awesome. The first question that I typically like to start with is, what is your daily routine?
I get this question a lot these days from various podcasts, and I even just got interviewed for a Mind Body Green article on the topic. So it's kind of at the top of my head. But I think the first thing I do first thing in the morning when I wake up in the morning is I actually spend about half an hour doing either meditation or visualization or just like laying in bed thinking about my day and what do I want to accomplish, what do I want to manifest. So there's like a good solid, that space between sleep and wake is like really great space for, really exploring your subconscious and programming your subconscious. And I think a lot of people miss that and they just jump out of bed and start their routine. So I give myself at least a half an hour to an hour of either meditation, visualization, thinking about what I want to do throughout the day, kind of envisioning the whole day going really well. And sometimes I even do dream work in that space. Like I'll set an alarm for like 30 minutes and I'll go back into a lucid dream just to see what I can get from that dream. So that's kind of an interesting facet of my routine that I don't think everybody else does. And then, brush my teeth, get dressed, depending on what time I went to bed the night before and what time I stopped eating, and whether I'm going to exercise that day. But most of the days I exercise. And so I'll eat a little bit before I exercise because Stacy Sims wrote this book called Roar, and in her book she was talking about how fasted exercise for women is really not as good for men as it is for men. So I stopped doing fasted exercise because I didn't want to increase my cortisol levels. So I do eat a little something before I go exercise. And today I went on a bike ride. Then I'll typically come back, take my supplements, shower, get ready, put some makeup on, start the day. And it really depends on how busy things are that will determine my morning routine. Cause like if I have extra time in the morning, then I'll do some biohacking, red light therapy, and or just like things that I would, and I've got this cool tuning fork I've been playing with. That's like a Schumann resonance tuning fork, and you kind of rub it all over your face and your skin. Maybe I'll do some like wash on in the morning, but if I don't have time for that, then it's a bit of a shorter routine.
Okay, awesome. So let's tease apart certain things there. Let's start with how much do you sleep? So you mentioned you wake up, you meditate.
Yeah. I notice I sleep less in the summer and more in the winter. I think a lot of people might do that, but I'm sleeping at least 8 hours a night, at a minimum, but sometimes I'll just sleep like 9 hours. And if I pull like a really long day or a serious travel day, I've been known to sleep 10 hours if I need to, but that's typically a recovery night, not like a normal night. Most nights is 8 hours, but I love sleep, and like sleep. Everyone's like, how do you do all that you do? And I'm like, sleep is my superpower. Like it's the thing that I do the best. And so, I've worked really hard on sleep early on in my career, and it is one of the things that I optimized, initially, and it's made a huge difference in my productivity.
I think that's a really good priority in terms
Yeah.
of, sleep is definitely going to be one of the top things that you can do for your health.
Yeah.
How do you track sleep, if at all, or you just don't bother
I use
with
an
it?
Aura ring, and I've
Okay.
got this app Sleep Space that I haven't really set up yet, but the founders sent me this thing that you could put your phone like in this little thing that sits on the side of your bed, but I haven't figured out how to get it to work yet. So I haven't really started that yet, but I do think that's a cool app too. But I use Aura Ring.
And you look at your deep sleep, your REM sleep, your heart rate variability.
I really don't know how accurate this deep sleep and REM sleep is, but I think enough. I mean, I dream every night, so I'm pretty sure I'm getting enough REM sleep. And then I wake up refreshed, so I'm assuming I get enough deep sleep. But then HRV is a big one too. And so, I kind of go by what I've learned from Jay Wiles from Hanu Health, about HRV. So if you see a big drop, like 20 to 40% of your HRV, that's a pretty good sign you need to recover more. So yeah, HRV is a good tool in the toolbox as well.
Do you look at try to do experiments about how to improve these things?
Yeah, I
Or
mean, I'm
that's not
actively
something?
working on HRV improvement right now.
Okay.
Because like I spent so much time improving my blood sugar metabolism, and then I started advising the company Hanu Health, and the founder convinced me to advise the company because he gave me the device and like gave me some tips. And so I'm slowly improving my HRV pretty systematically. So like more cardio exercise. I was doing mostly weightlifting and yoga, and like adding more cardio has helped a lot. Adding more meditation has helped a lot. And not eating before you go to bed is a big one that a lot of people forget. So ending your eating window early. Last night was a little bit tricky because I had a dinner party, and so it ended a bit late. But like social connection is also really nourishing and really good for your nervous system. So I woke up feeling really good today because I had such amazing people over last night. But yeah, I have a whole like list of things to do to optimize HRV, and I'm slowly working on that. But I think a lot of people need to like realize that like the actual number itself is it really depends on which device you're getting it from. Like Apple has a different format for HRV gathering than Oura Ring, so you can't really compare those two numbers. And then it's really like the absolute number does matter, but what also matters is like the change from baseline. And then resting heart rate's a really good marker of health as well. Mine's consistently like mid 50s. I'd like to get it lower than that, but I'm happy with like mid 50s.
Awesome. So have you found that any supplements help with HRV, or it's mainly the
I
lifestyle
definitely
things?
have noticed that when I get really stressed out, cutting back on coffee actually helped me. And then adding more adaptogens. So, I've got a ton of adaptogens in the kitchen. So I've got holy basil. I've got like Ron Tea Garden's Tibetan Magic, which is an adaptogen tea. And so I'm a big fan of adaptogens when my cortisol's high. But when you're really stressed, you don't want to overdo the caffeine. So that's something I had to cut back on last year because I had a pretty stressful year last year.
Okay, and caffeine in the sense of coffee or even tea?
I'm just like the absolute amount of caffeine. So I designed I designed a coffee detox for Mudwater, and I just like realized that caffeine's found in a lot of things besides coffee. It's found in tea, it's found in chocolate, and I do my fair share of dark chocolate. So you just want to kind of add up your total amount you're consuming and make sure you're not overdoing the caffeine. But a big one is gratitude, meditation, prayer. Those are surprisingly effective. Classical music, something I really enjoy. I get massages regularly. I spend time with my friends. I love animals. My family has a bunch of animals. I don't have any animals yet because I travel too much. I have a bunch of PEMF mats in my living room, which those are great. Acupressure mats I've been found to improve HRV.
You found the PEMF mats like improve your
I
HRV
haven't seen that
particular?
improve my HRV, but they
Okay.
theoretically do. I've
Right,
seen
right.
I've seen the acupressure mat work on my HRV.
Just to give you the background why I'm asking, because I had somebody on a podcast that had this HRV headband or whatever this device, and it said,
Sure.
this massively improved his HRV. I bought the same thing. I tried it out. No improvement in HRV. Now, I'm trying to figure out if that's just
Well,
me
maybe your
and if
HRV
other
is already
people.
really high,
Yeah, but he was claiming that his was 100, which
Mm,
is around where mine was, and then it went
yeah.
to or maybe it was like 90. I don't know, but it went to it jumped by like 40 points.
Mm,
I'm like, oh, that's exciting. Let me see what
yeah.
it's doing, right? And mine is
Wow.
typically around 100.
Yeah.
Depending on what I'm doing, but let's say it's around 100. It didn't change at all.
I mean, I also
Yeah.
go to the gym and do sauna and cold plunge. I avoid alcohol. I stay hydrated. I do like lots of
You never
serpine.
drink alcohol, or you
I do I
like
drank like maybe 4 drinks in 10 days on vacation. So I'll do like
okay.
occasionally a drink. But it's not really I'm not into it. Like I could really take it or leave it. It's like if I'm with people who drink, then I'll have something, but I'm not going to make it a big part of my life because it's carcinogenic and I don't want to get cancer.
Right.
But 12 hours at least of intermittent fasting, depending on my stress levels, I'll do more. Fasting is definitely one of the things that has improved my HRV in the past. And then obviously like there's supplements, like I take a ton of fish oil. I like CBD. I put some GABA in my matcha today. Magnesium is a no brainer, and breath work,
Right. That's everything you mentioned I think is pretty spot on with like the stuff that improves HRV and
Yeah.
just overall stress resilience.
Yeah.
How many supplements do you take a day? It sounds like you take a fair bit.
I rotate my supplements, but right now what I'm taking is fish oil, lots of like mega doses of fish oil, pharmaceutical grade. And then I'm also doing vitamin D, K1, K2, magnesium, B complex. I'm using Qualia Skin right now because I'm doing a lot of media appearances, and I've noticed that product actually does improve my skin. And then I'm experimenting with cholinergic supplementation. So I was doing CDB choline, and then I got some uridine, so I've been playing with that just for memory. And coenzyme Q10, almost always taking that. So I switch between like this Norwegian brand and MitoQ. Probiotics, digestive enzymes when I need them. What else do I got on my shelf?
Do you notice differences from everything that you take? Like, is it clear when you take a B complex, you feel better? When you take a magnesium, when you take
Magnesium, I definitely
vitamin D?
notice. Vitamin D for sure with immunity. I'm also taking an immunity supplement because I'm going to be doing a lot of travel the next few weeks, and there's a lot of viruses going around. So I'm taking this supplement called BioVegetarian by Pro. It's a really good supplement for colds and preventing colds.
Okay.
I'm doing BioVegetarian by Priority One.
What does it contain in there?
All sorts of stuff like vitamin A and tons of botanicals. It's also something that if I get an infection of some sort, the thing seems to take it away immediately. So I'm kind of just like bringing that with me as I travel. I'm not going to take it every day necessarily because it's a pretty big horse pill, but I like to keep enough on me that if I do get an infection or something, that I can take care of it. And
how often do you get sick in a year?
I'm
for
not
example?
really getting sick very often, but there's a lot of viruses going around right now, and I'm going to be on planes,
Right.
and so I just want to be prepared.
It's crazy how many people are getting sick around me. It's
Yeah,
nuts.
it's just there's a
Everybody's
lot.
like,
I mean, there's just a lot of viruses. And I had COVID last year, and so that was fun, and didn't enjoy
did you
that.
get any long COVID symptoms?
I did a ton of biohacking during and after.
Okay.
So I did ozone during, and then I did NAD therapy after IV for 5 days. Those two things really nipped it in the bud. I felt like 20. I felt younger and healthier, and my HRV improved after doing the NAD for a week. And the NAD was combined with NanoV and the Centropix BEMF mat and hiking in Sedona. So I did a ton of I did like yoga and stretching on this retreat. And so it was like literally all the things you could imagine doing to optimize to really optimize and biohack. And so I felt like better after I did that week than before COVID, which was interesting. So I was like really grateful for having I was like amazing people in my community who offer all sorts of services. And, I didn't even really write about NAD in the book because I hadn't done a full, therapeutic course of it. But after doing IV NAD, I'm going to be doing that like once a year at least.
Oh, interesting. So
Yeah,
you
5 days.
find that after the IV NAD, I mean, there's some controversy around the IV NAD.
I thought it was controversial. I was skeptical. And there's this thing called the Conover protocol. So they do IV NAD and then they do a big, huge vitamin niacin push. So you get this huge flush. And I don't know if that makes a difference in how the NAD penetrates. But first of all, NAD therapy feels like shit. You do not enjoy it. It's not pleasurable. But by day 4, they claim that it induces mitochondrial fusion. And you just start feeling like amazing. And then by day 5, you're just like, I felt like I was 20 again. So I was like, yeah, I might be like skeptical, but then for direct experience, I'm very Gnostic about a lot of things in life. So like direct experience is like really key. So like you're kind of similar. Like, do you feel a difference? And I felt a significant shift in my overall health.
Right. I mean, once you mentioned niacin, I think that puts in the monkey wrench a bit because I feel great when I just take niacin.
Yeah.
Right. Like.
Yeah. Maybe the niacin would be all I need. Who knows?
Right.
But
maybe you should.
Yeah.
That would be a good experiment just to try niacin because you obviously absorb niacin because you get a niacin flush.
Yeah.
And generally people don't have a problem absorbing niacin. So
yeah,
I would try just the niacin by itself. I find a lot of people don't get enough niacin.
I think
Actually,
that's
true. I was
true.
quite deficient.
Yeah, I've been using ion layer patches as well. So you can get NAD from like these like ionophoresis patches, which is a lot cheaper than IV NAD. And like I definitely noticed an energy boost from those as well.
Interesting. Mm-hmm. Interesting. Do you take NMN or nicotinamide riboside?
Not yet.
No.
You
don't buy into it, or?
No, I just like haven't found a brand that I like am wild about, and I just haven't really dug into it. But yeah, and also like I don't want to overdo things, like occasionally doing these patches. I mean, I measure everything in my blood to make sure that like my general levels of vitamins and minerals are strong. But for NAD, I don't want to overdo it. I don't want to. I think one of this one guy, James Clement, who runs this health span like organization, he believes that if we overdo NAD when we're young, it could actually potentially increase cancer risk. There's a lot of controversy around that statement. Some people believe that NAD may prevent cancer. So like nobody really knows at this point, but I want to save the things that I think are pretty heavy hitting tools for when I really need them rather than using them every day, all day long.
Right. And I think they are probably overhyped, the
Maybe.
NMN
Yeah. I
and
mean, the supplements, I
nicotinamide
think they
riboside.
are. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I take a lot of supplements, but
I mean, the
I
biggest
guess
one that's made a difference in my health is omegas. Like the
right.
pharmaceutical grade omegas fixed, like they really made my labs look better than ever. And I was like, I do think they function on so many levels. They're so incredibly potent in different ways in physiology and health that like I really feel like it helped my lipids, and it helped my, I had never had a lot of inflammation, but my blood sugar's at an all-time low. My limit my CRP is really low, and my homocystine's healthy, and so all my labs just look like really good these days, which I'm pretty happy about.
So now I want to get into your book, Molly, because you obviously have a lot to talk about. There's a lot of interesting information there. And I want to talk about a topic that's very dear to my heart, which is the mitochondria and energy, which you speak about in your book as well. So people are missing energy in this day and age, right? They want to have more energy, and the powerhouses of our cells are the mitochondria. How do people get more energy? What are your top hacks for getting more energy?
Sure. So one of the things I want people to understand is that mitochondria are, of course, the powerhouses of the cell, but they're also kind of like the general contractors as well, because they actually decide where the energy goes and what is it, and what do you do with it. So they're making a lot of decisions on a cellular level to actually figure out how to direct the energy properly throughout the cell, throughout the body. So they're really important. I mean, they literally help modulate the stress response, the immune response, the sexual function, sex hormone production. They do a lot of things besides just make energy. But generally speaking, when we eat food and we breathe air, we burn oxygen. We use the oxygen to burn the fuel to make energy. And it's in the form of an electrochemical gradient, which basically is like a battery, but also it's a capacitor. So it literally will deploy energy quickly. So you have this, this power plant, this battery, this capacitor, this signal transducer in your cell they're coming together regularly, and they're communicating, and then they're breaking apart. And they do this thing called mitochondrial biogenesis, which means they make more of themselves if they're sent the signals to do that. But they also we want to discard the ones that don't carry a charge. So that's what mitophagy is also known as. So a lot of what we want to optimize for is what's called mitochondrial quality control. Can we make sure that we have enough functioning mitochondria in the cell? And can we throw out the ones that are no longer functioning properly? And this is what I've kind of like spent a lot of my time in the last few years studying, is like, how do you boost mitochondrial health and function? So one of the biggest ones you can do is exercise and recovery. So exercise creates a signal to the cell that says, okay, so today I've done this much work. Tomorrow might be more challenging. So I'm going to actually prepare for tomorrow by predicting that tomorrow could be more challenging today, because I got a signal that I got a challenge. So that's why we need to exercise, because we actually need to send the signal to our cells to make more energy. It's also another reason why, for example, before the podcast started, you did a bunch of push-ups. Doing intermittent exercise throughout the day, doing intermittent activity throughout the day is a great way to send those cellular signals to make more energy. So this is what I would call a mitohormetic stressor. So when we stress our cells by giving them a challenge, it can make us stronger. So mito means mitochondria. Hormesis is the process of becoming stronger with stress. So stress is not bad. It's just we need to recover from stress, which is why in my practice, I've seen women who are like bodybuilders, and they were working out 7 days a week. And they came to me and they're like, my hormones are all over the place. And I'm like, well, what's going on with your fitness? Like, tell me more about your fitness, training. And she's like, well, I exercise every day for like 1 to 2 hours. And I was like, okay, well, you might want to consider taking a rest day. And recovery is really, really just as important to fitness as fitness is itself. And yeah, it's very overlooked by a lot of people. But there's a switch that happens. So there's the exercise and the recovery, which leads to improvement of cellular health. But there's a bunch of other mitohormetic stressors that you've probably heard of, but that you may not see it in this way. One of them is also cold plunge and heat. So like part of the reason why you were seeing cold plunges and saunas showing up in more and more gyms is because people are doing this rotation of cold and hot and cold and hot. And that is actually sending the signal to the cell to adapt to those demands. So that's another one of those stressors. It's also really what I learned during the pandemic was like, if I go outside and I work out in cold weather, I can actually train my body to handle cold more effectively. And I used to be really sensitive to cold, but now my cells have adapted because of the stress that I placed on them, and they can handle cold now, which is really interesting. So we can teach our body to handle stress by giving it stress. And temperature stress is one of those mitohormetic stressors, those switches that we can flip. And then there's also things like hypoxia, hyperoxia. So like breathwork practices are really great for sending the signal to the mitochondria to adapt to those demands. So a lot of what breathwork involves is hyperventilation and then breath holding. But then there's also people who go free diving or do, like high altitude training, and they're basically teaching their mitochondria to properly handle these different stressors so that they can become stronger. And so what I write about in the book is that there's a bunch of toggling of mitohormetic stressors. There's cold plunge and heat. There's fasting and feasting. So a lot of people also never fast. They're just eating all day long and they're snacking all day long. And it's really important that we actually create space between meals and create space between, sleep and food. And not just like a lot of people eat in the middle of the night or eat late in the middle of the night when they're working late. And that's not great for metabolism either. So the feasting and the fasting and what's called flipping the metabolic switch, going from carb to fat metabolism, is another mitohormetic stressor. So just going into ketosis and then going back into carb metabolism, that switch trains the cell to metabolize different fuels more effectively. And, then there's also things like high pressure and low pressure, as I mentioned. So HBOT, one of the reasons why HBOT, hyperbaric chambers, work so well for mitochondrial health is that they put you at high oxygen at high pressure, and then they relieve the pressure and lower the oxygen. And that is sensed by the cell as hypoxia. So the cell senses that pressure difference and that oxygen difference. And it basically, there's this thing called hypoxia-inducible factor that gets activated. And so learning how to send these signals properly to the cell will literally train your body to handle more stress and to create the conditions where you can actually thrive and become more energized.
That's awesome. So those are all your top mitochondrial enhancer optimizations.
Well, another one would be also like psychosocial stress is good. Like I had some psychosocial stress is good. So if you have healthy relationships, even if you have a healthy family, it can be slightly stressful to spend time with people, right? Like, especially if you're an introvert. I'm an extrovert, so I love spending time with people. But we need human connection to thrive. We also need alone time to thrive. So psychosocial interaction and time alone, I would also consider to be a mitohormetic stressor because you're getting quite a lot of signals from your environment when you're around people. I think overcoming social challenges is a really important skill that we all should learn. But I also think it's really important to develop your tribe of people around you that make you feel safe, because oxytocin, as you've been writing about lately, is a really important antioxidant. It's an anti-inflammatory, it's mitoprotective, and it's cardioprotective. So it seems that love actually, on a cellular level, is conducive to longevity. And I think the core pathway for that is probably dopamine and oxytocin based.
Interesting. So there's a lot to unpack there. I wanted to talk about fasting. I want to talk about oxytocin.
Sure.
Maybe we'll start with oxytocin. What are some of your best ways to increase oxytocin and, improve the psychosocial element? Because I know in your book, you speak about how to improve the human connection, and oxytocin is part of that. So let's go into that more.
Yeah. So, 1 in 5 men and 1 in 10 women apparently have no friends. So one of the first things that people need to learn how to do, that I actually have been talking a lot about on podcasts lately, but I didn't put in the book, but it'll probably go in my next book, is everybody needs to learn how to make friends, because you need a tribe to survive in this world, right? We actually evolved genetics that are designed for tribal cultures. And yet we have modern lifestyles that are isolating, that cause us to spend a lot of time alone. So, I had people over last night for dinner, and it was really not that complicated for me to just say, "Hey, I want to have a potluck, bring some food." and we had a feast. It was amazing. And it felt so emotionally nourishing just to see my friends and get hugs, and human touch and hugging is a great way to get oxytocin. Cuddling. We didn't really get into it last night, but I tend to throw parties when in my place, and people end up sitting on couches and cuddling each other. So cuddling is a great way to do that. You can actually just touch your own arm and just like kind of like just stroke your own arm to release a little bit of your own natural oxytocin. But animals and having dogs and pets is one of the reasons why they're so great, is because they have this unconditional love for you as your and so like just holding a dog and snuggling a dog is a great way to get oxytocin. But holding a baby will actually cause your brain to release oxytocin in order for you to bond so that you can keep the child alive. So it's like an adaptive response to being born, is like you have to be bonded to so that you are kept alive. It's probably the reason why babies are so cute, is so we pay attention to them. But yeah, so those would be my bigger ones. And then some people supplement with oxytocin nasal spray, but I have not found it to be extraordinarily effective. I think it's somewhat useful, but I think, like
it's not the same as when you're like cuddling, I feel, right?
Mhm.
I've done also the the spray. I find that
Yeah.
cuddling is, hugs are one thing. Does it increase oxytocin if you just have like a 1-second hug, or you have to? Like,
I think you need to hold it for a little bit.
Yeah.
I think it also depends on how you feel in that hug, right? So like, do you feel
Right.
calm or do you feel scared? MDMA is actually a profound booster of oxytocin, but I wouldn't recommend people go and do a bunch of MDMA. But it's a serotonin releasing agent. So anything that releases large amounts of serotonin is also going to lead to large amounts of oxytocin release. So, sex and orgasm is one of my favorites. Obviously, I don't unfortunately have a partner right now, but when I have had partners, sex is a great way to, release a large amount of oxytocin in the act of orgasm. But that's part of the reason why people masturbate, is like oxytocin release. So,
you just unleashed the internet of feral men upon
I'm
Austin,
sure.
Texas.
I'm sure.
They're like,
maybe.
what? Molly's single. It's time to head to Austin.
That's sweet. Are you single? How's dating in Israel?
Dating is much easier in a lot of ways, just because everybody's way closer. So I find the U.S.
there's a lot more
the
proximity.
Proximity.
Yeah.
In the U.S., the way they built all these cities, with the exception of New York City, right?
Yeah.
I think that's like an exception. Is like everything is very spread apart. California is a good example of the urban sprawl. Austin has a lot of that urban sprawl.
Yeah.
There's
Austin,
like,
actually,
in
my
house.
neighborhood, it's very walkable. So
Okay.
I can walk over to my neighbor's house and like I can go to my gym, and I've got a social club in my gym. So
are you in a house or you're in an apartment there?
I'm in a house. Yeah.
Okay. But it's houses. It's not apartments, right? I think if you're in apartments, like New York City's apartments, you're generally not. I mean, if you're in a house, you're not in your own house. You're in a house with roommates or whatever. Generally, you don't have your own house there. Yeah. But I find that that's like one of the biggest things about Tel Aviv, is that you get this proximity. So if there's any event, you're just like, oh, it's a 5-minute walk, or it's so easy to facilitate that. Now you still have to. You still have to make the effort, just like anywhere, but the facilitation, like, it's just super easy to do it if you want to do it. Like I'm a 5-minute walk, or less than 5-minute walk from the beach.
Nice.
You just go there. Yeah. And then everybody's like everybody's on the boardwalk, and it's just, you're around people all the time. I'm
obsessed with Israel. Israel's incredible. Like, the food is so unbelievable there. It's like, I think it's just one of the biggest downsides of living in America is the challenge of staying healthy is like you're fighting against the current of food in your face all the time, nonstop advertisements around food, like so many reasons to drive cars rather than ride bike. I mean, I ride my bike, so like I don't drive, but most people do. And, most people are knowledge workers these days. So we're living in this and now we have I don't know what your media is like in Israel, but the media here is garbage. And it's very psychosocially stressful to live in America these days. And I think what's interesting is I think Israel has its own challenges with stress, because obviously there's certain dangers and risks there that may not be in other places. But I felt really safe in Israel. And I felt like the ability to eat healthy was a lot easier there than in America, because the quality of the food is just so much different than in America.
For sure. There's something about America where even Europe and Israel, the quality of food is much better. Whereas in
It's
the
so much
US,
better. I don't know if it's like lack of GMOs or what, but there's a difference.
I don't know. I mean, yeah, I'm not sure. They're putting less vegetable oils into stuff. They're putting less.
Yeah.
It's just more natural. Like there's more. I'll give you an example. Something that's quite interesting is with the organ meats, right? Like in the US, you have to really dig to find organ meats. And here, it turns out like, yeah, my grandmother makes all these kinds of different organ meats. And it's like the more traditional a society, the more that they're into more.
I mean, I'm
real
really
food.
lucky. I've got a friend who owns a cattle farm here, and he just like stops by and brings me bones and heart and liver. And so I'm like really, really lucky. And then I went to the farmer's market and I found chicken livers that were like, really high quality pastured chicken livers. And like, I just made pate. So like, I definitely prioritize it, but it's not like it's an easy thing for me to just go find. Like, I think you have to really seek it out. But I think it might change. I mean, it's like there is a movement towards more carnivore diets. I'm not a carnivore. I love vegetables. I love the vegetables in Israel. They're like incredible. But I do really think that it seems like there's a bit of a shift happening, specifically with like Liver King and like Carnivore Aurelius and these like online influencers that are making liver cool. So I think it is changing a little bit.
Yeah, it's interesting because it's so in traditional societies, it's always been like that, right? They always did eat liver. Like there's a restaurant. A lot of places here have liver as a meal, and it's normal. So it's kind of just like in the West, in the US, they kind of did a complete reset and went to fast food and all this kind of crap.
Yeah,
but
which is really poisonous to the mitochondria function, turns out,
Yeah. Getting back to so you mentioned the healthy human connection. And I think like we're talking about, like where you're living is important. So I think you found your community in Austin, right?
I mean, I have communities in LA, San Francisco, Austin, New York, and Miami. And that's really, a major advantage. Tel Aviv.
I'm here.
I've got maybe a handful of people I know in Israel, I think. But like, it's a real effort to build community. Like you have to work at it just like anything else. And I feel really grateful to have an amazing community and to feel included,
That's awesome. So let's start talking about, we were talking about food and
Sure.
Let's talk about the absence of food. For example, fasting is. I remember when I was I remember 10 years ago, I was doing intermittent fasting, and I barely saw anybody. Like just was not on the radar, right?
Yeah.
Now it's just exploded. Just random people are doing intermittent fasting, and so in your book you talk about who should and shouldn't fast, and I've also spoken about this a little bit. I think it's a fascinating topic because it's something that's very, very individual, and it's very important to know, to really dive deep into it. So maybe you could take us through how women respond to fasting, how people should know if how they should fast, when to fast, if they should fast.
Yeah. So the first thing I want to say is that like not everybody necessarily has to fast if they don't want to. But the people who probably should are those with prediabetes and diabetes. And the reason why I say that is because they've got metabolic dysfunction. People with PCOS, people with insulin resistance, people even with hypertension, people with signs of metabolic disease. Fasting is going to be a tool in the toolbox to help you mitigate those problems. And there's a lot of controversy still around fasting, but like the way that I think it's really interesting that there's so much controversy around it. And yet clearly we have genetics designed for being able to go without food. We have metabolism designed to go without food. Why is it that when we fast and we upregulate survival genes that literally improve, your cellular function, reduce, basically improve mitophagy and autophagy, like if we didn't have these mechanisms in our body to even go into ketosis, like it just seems silly to me to say like fasting is not like nobody should do it. It's like, well, we clearly have these metabolic pathways that demonstrate that there's benefits to it for some people and for some situations. And in general, I think that like almost every religion in the world has some fasting involved. So I think there's something to it and to our evolution that we adapted to be able to fast for a reason. And I think it's because it does potentially improve our survival. Now, for me, the reason why I started fasting in 2018, 2019 was I had like a very concerning fasting blood sugar. It was like upper 90s, almost to 100. And to me, that was concerning. I was like, I had done a bunch of research and it looked to me like that was a problem. And I was like, I think this is an area of improvement. I think that like, generally speaking, I can lower my fasting blood sugar and I think I'll be healthier because a lot of the research that's been done on people is demonstrating that like, yes, of course, if you're pre-diabetic, you are at risk for metabolic conditions like diabetes, but you're even at risk for things like neuropathy and hypertension and other things. So having a high fasting glucose is not optimal for optimal health. So I lowered mine from like upper 90s to like lower 80s. And I think this morning,
through the fasting?
Through fasting. That was the number one thing that
Wow.
I did. And also exercise played a role. But I dramatically, I mean, I wasn't even exercising a lot when I started fasting because I didn't want to, because I didn't want to combine the two. So I don't recommend people who are serious athletes to do a ton of fasting because typically what I notice in serious athletes is that they need to eat more. They're often under eating. They're often under consuming protein. And so I don't necessarily recommend a lot of athletes who are already activating mitophagy and autophagy through athleticism do a ton of fasting. Now, am I saying, but if you're not training on a rest day and you want to do, a 15, 16, 20 hour fast, like I'm not going to stop you. But if you are actively exercising a lot, specifically if you're a woman, you do need to be a bit more careful with your metabolism. I find that fasting works best for people who are sedentary, who have weight to lose, who have liver fat, who have visceral fat, and who don't want to do the work of exercise. Like I think fasting is a fantastic replacement for exercise for people who don't want to move their bodies a lot. That's a lot of people. Now, I would recommend everybody exercise. So what I recommend people start with is not even fasting at all. I recommend people start with getting on a whole food diet. So like, let's just start with moving from processed foods, fast foods, ultra processed foods, and start eating a whole food diet. Because that in itself is a challenge and that in itself is going to improve your health. Then I say, let's cut back on a lot of your snacking and build some metabolic flexibility by just going without eating for a few hours. And then after that, I'm like, okay, can you do like a 14-hour fast? And if they can't, then I would recommend doing some ketosis and getting more fat adapted.
Like
some people bonk. Some people just bonk.
You're saying they bonk. Okay.
They bonk. It's just like
their brain bonks.
Their brain gets irritable, tired. They just can't handle it. They feel like they're low energy. They feel anxious. They get hypoglycemic. The reason being that they're metabolically inflexible. So if you're metabolically inflexible and this is, by the way, can happen to athletes. So one of my friends who was running a marathon, she hadn't trained for it and her friend had trained for it. She ran the marathon and I had taught her how to fast beforehand. She hadn't even been training for a marathon and she finished it ahead of her friend. Her friend actually bonked in the marathon because she was carb adapted and she ran out of carbohydrates and she couldn't tap into her fat metabolism. So this is why getting fat adapted is actually probably more of a priority for people before they start doing longer fasts than fasting itself. Because if you can't actually metabolize your own fat and break into it because you haven't built that machinery because you've been eating carbs all day, every day for years on end, then getting into ketosis is going to help you with that flexibility. And this is part of the reason why I love this device, the Lumen device, which is an Israeli company. And it teaches people how to become metabolically flexible by changing their macronutrients and by dropping into ketosis here and there. So
what does that device tell you exactly? Like
it tells you if you're burning carbs or fat or both. If you're in the middle. So basically it's going to tell you if you're actively in carb metabolism or if you're actually able to get into fat metabolism. When I was at my highest stress last year and I was in a high cortisol state, I couldn't actually get this thing to get into fat metabolism because my body, what people don't realize about cortisol, it's called a glucocorticoid. So gluco means glucose. So literally cortisol's job is to maintain higher glucose levels so that you can get out of danger. So it can actually make you insulin resistant no matter what you're eating. So you'll start breaking down your own muscle mass to feed your brain with glucose if you're under high stress. So that was one of the things about using this thing during my high stress. I was like, man, I got to get my stress levels down because I'm like eating low carb and I'm not hitting into fat metabolism. So your respiratory quotient changes depending on the macronutrients you're consuming primarily. And it's a ratio between your carbon dioxide and I believe it's a carbon dioxide and oxygen consumption. It's like a mathematical equation, but they figured out how to take this thing that used to be like a size of a room, and they turned it into a nano sized device.
That's cool. Do you use it every day?
I don't use it every day. I'd say that I use a continuous glucose monitor more than I use a lumen, but
you still
yeah.
I thought a continuous glucose monitor was good to use, for a certain amount of time, and then what is spiking your blood glucose and what isn't.
So I find it to be a kind of like it's like a for me, because I've been using these since 2014. I find a glucose monitor to be a bit of like how do I put it? It's like, it's a check-in for me. It's like, how am I doing? Like, at the end of last year, my glycemic variability, because I was under a ton of stress, it was like a super jagged curve. It was all over the place. I took a 2-week trip to Puerto Rico. I worked the first week. I took the second week off. I haven't taken like a week off in many, many months. And I came back into town and my blood sugar has been like super stable. And I think a lot of it was the stress change. So I look at the glucose monitoring as like, am I actually like checking in with my stress levels? Am I checking in with my exercise levels? Am I checking in with what am I eating? What is my diet like? And how much I'm eating? When am I eating? And I can see all of that on there. So I actually put these things on at least 4 times a year just to check in with my body.
Wow. And you mentioned that in your book about managing blood sugar and weight with the CGM.
Yeah.
Let's talk about that a little more because, I guess the way I used to look at it, and I want you to correct me if I don't know what I'm talking about, but I kind of thought like the HbA1c was mainly the gold standard as long as it's not corrupted by other factors.
There's so many factors that can corrupt it. Right. There's so many things that can make it useless.
Right.
Like nobody talks about that though. Like there's a lot of reasons why. I mean, I have a whole lecture on this actually. And so like anemia is something that and a lot of women are anemic. So just being anemic because it's a hemoglobin A1C, right? So if you actually have low hemoglobin levels, then you're going to have an abnormal A1C. So like that's a big issue. And then also
abnormal in what sense? Is it going to be low?
Yeah, it'll be surreptitiously low.
So,
but then
let's say for me, for example, I have a higher hemoglobin. My hemoglobin A1C is at 5.1%. What would go wrong with that metric?
Well, I don't know if that's not out of range though. Like it's a very good. How high is your hemoglobin?
Like 16.
Okay, so it's it's still in the normal range though.
Yeah, it's normal range. I'm not talking about it's like high. I'm talking about higher than average, and it's genetically predisposed. Also, I have it in. That's my self-decode results show that I'm higher predisposition, and my lab results kind of match that. So, but what I'm trying to understand is how does that? Okay, so my hemoglobin are normal, higher, whatever, higher, normal. What is my HbA1c is 5.1%. What does that mean?
I mean, you're not. I wouldn't consider you're going to be in the. It's more of like the people who have like hemochromatosis might have slightly higher, and then people who have anemia might be slightly lower. So that's the way I would think about this.
Okay. So I don't have an. Let's say somebody doesn't have an anemia. Then is there problems with the marker still?
Yeah. So it's very inaccurate predictor of prediabetes. So it's only 60% sensitive in predicting diabetes. and it's like terribly inaccurate for prediabetes. So I don't know why we're using it, because it's like it's just not a good test. Like, I don't know why it's considered a gold standard. It's a garbage tool, in my opinion. Like, apparently, in comparison to the fasting plasma glucose and 2-hour oral glucose tolerance test, hemoglobin A1c has a false negative rate of 64.9% for prediabetes and 75.1% for diabetes, and a false positive rate for 20.1% for prediabetes and 0.6 for diabetes. So like, it's not optimal, you know?
And how does that compare? So you're saying fasting glucose is a much better marker than HbA1c?
Well, I personally would say that the best marker is, I mean, I look, CGMs are not perfect. They can be inaccurate. Like to test the ability of a CGM to work properly, you need the MARD. So typically, like, the MARD is going to range from 5 to 15%. Most finger stick devices,
MARD?
it's a marker of accuracy of CGM. And so like the most accurate versions is the Dexcom, because it's the deepest. But then the less accurate is the Abbott. It's about 10% inaccurate most of the time. So I would say, like, I found at least a pretty large percentage of the Abbotts are going to be abnormal, but they're getting better. They are getting better over time. But one of the best things you can do is just buy a finger stick glucose monitor and like measure it before and after meals, and measure it like before, first thing in the morning when you wake up, and actually get your post meal blood sugar, get your fasting blood sugar. But then I like the CGM because you can see your glycemic variability. You can actually see how noisy the curve is. You can actually look at like what's going on in the patterns. It's kind of like the movie versus the snapshot.
That's interesting. And I would also, this goes to show you that whenever you're measuring something, there's actually many ways to measure it. There's no one way to measure it. And I think a genetic predisposition for diabetes is useful. Your HbA1c, maybe not as, now I don't think it's as useful as I thought it was before, but fasting glucose, I do want to get a CGM, and I do have one of those pinprick tests. I just have to build up the courage to keep pricking my finger.
You're very fit. You're super, super fit. So I would be surprised if you had abnormal blood sugar, because you do a lot of exercise. You move your body, you eat really healthy. But the people who need to be more careful and need to start examining this stuff are people who have like a high waist circumference, people who have high amounts of visceral fat. Like, have you ever done a full body MRI?
I've done an MRI on my brain and my heart.
Yeah. So you can do an MRI of your trunk. And I do these through the company Pronuvo. And you can literally see your visceral fat. Like, you can see if it's in the wrong place. You can see where it's located. You can also do
I've done an ultrasound.
scans. Yeah.
I've done a DEXA. Oh yeah. I've done a DEXA scan, and I've done an ultrasound, so that both of those can tell you what your visceral fat is like.
Yeah.
And that was completely normal. Optimal.
That's great. Yeah. So the chances of you having, 5.1 is great. If anything, I probably eat too low carb.
The thing is that one thing that I found that happened is my blood glucose is fasting blood glucose is typically between 95 to 100. It's never hit 100.
Yeah. That's an area of optimization. So like, there's a bunch of things that you can do to lower your fasting blood sugar. The big one is just adding more intermittent fasting, but also the question is how much stress are you under? That's a big one.
Not
too.
a lot.
Not a lot of stress.
I don't feel it, meaning like I don't feel like I'm
but the
stressed.
other question is how are you measuring that? Is it like a finger stick? Is it at the
when I go to the doctor?
So I don't really trust, to be honest with you, I don't really trust fasting blood sugars in labs as much these days, because I know that I've seen on my blood sugar monitor before, I've had a blood sugar monitor on the morning I've gotten labs done, and I wake up in the morning and it's like 80. And then I go to the doctor and or the LabCorp, and I go get my blood drawn. And literally in the middle of the blood draw, I can see that my blood sugar is rising. And it's because there's stress of getting a freaking needle in your arm. And so I don't think people really get it. There's a lot of things that can affect that number. And one of those is just like white coat syndrome. Like being in a clinic,
Mm.
getting a needle in your arm is in itself stressful, which is why morning cortisol levels are not very reliable either. That's why I do urine cortisol testing instead, which is obviously controversial, and a lot of people like are not, they don't believe these things. I found them to be really helpful, but again, cortisol measurements have to be taken in the context of clinical history and other markers. So like I really think it's important for people to look at cortisol and look at blood sugar together, because if you see really high cortisol levels and you see higher blood sugar levels, you pretty much can guarantee a person's got some temporary insulin resistance as a result of high cortisol. If you see really low cortisol levels and you see really low blood sugar, typically that's because the person's burned out a bit and they're not able to maintain their blood sugar effectively because their cortisol levels are so low. So it's not like you can just look at these things alone. Yet it's like, this is not common medicine. Like I had to learn this through making my own mistakes with my own body, and then like seeing a lot of clients and seeing what burnout looks like clinically, seeing what it looks like in labs, and being able to triangulate, okay, this person has low, this person has like low blood sugar and has issues with their cortisol, and they're clearly telling me that they're burned out and like they need, in that situation, I would actually prescribe a little bit of Cortef, a little bit of hydrocort, not like a lot, like 5 milligrams at a time is like not very much, but that can be just getting, one of the things that really helps people when they're really struggling and they're out of balance is just restoring the balance of hormones and in their body. That can make a big difference in how they feel.
Yeah, and you mentioned in your book the how to measure your stress in order to manage it, and you speak about urine cortisol, things like CGM, sleep monitors, which I think the Oura was your main HRV monitors.
I checked my phone in between, and like I'd say that like I'm somewhat embarrassed by my HRV. It's like at a good day, it's around 70. But
that's
when
pretty good, actually.
But when I have a friend who's 150, and he said that he's not been, he was not always at 150. He said he worked his way up there. So just like I worked my fasting blood sugar down with fasting and with like metabolic flexibility training and like cutting my carbohydrates and doing carb cycling, he did New Calm. He like worked really hard to get his nervous system balanced. And that's my next big foray. Like next year is like all about HRV monitoring and just stress monitoring. Cause I'm really convinced that like, I'm going to actually degrade my longevity if I continue to let my body be this stressed out. Like we've hit a new world. We're in a new world. Women are starting to wake up and realize that like hustle culture is not giving us the ROI we thought it was going to get us. Like we thought that like somehow if we achieve as much as men do, that like our lives will be amazing. And like, honestly, it doesn't necessarily change the quality of your life. It just makes you more stressed out and have more money in the bank. So like, I'm not going to stop working at my projects. I'm not going to stop building things, but I'm going to approach my life from a place of balance, and I'm going to manifest what I want for my life without feeling deeply stressed out like I did last year. Like last year was just insane. And I just like, for anyone out there who wants to write a book, funny thing about writing a book on health is that it actually is ironically going to affect your health. And the first time I heard this was this woman who wrote this book on weight loss. And she was like, it's really funny that like I'm writing a book on weight loss and I actually really struggle. I'm like really struggling with like sedentary behavior writing this book. And then another woman wrote a book on sexuality, and she's like, it's really funny. I'm writing a book on sexuality and I'm like actually not having sex right now because I'm so stressed out. So like, I think writing a book was just a little, I'm so grateful I did it, because I'm like, I did the audiobook and I listened to myself talk and I like was like, wow, like I'm really proud of this book.
Oh, you did the audiobook. Wow.
I did the audiobook.
That's a big one. Okay.
It was hard. I had to sit into
That's how you know it's a very serious book, people. If someone does an audiobook.
I had to sit there for a week in like a studio talking and listening to myself talk. It was not pleasant. I did not enjoy it, but I actually was grateful I did it, because it made me go through the whole book and be like, whoa. I mean, this book has been the culmination of many years of thinking about health and really feeling like I'm finally at a place in my life where I actually trust that like I know what I'm doing. I really do finally feel like I know health now. And I feel like I have a pretty comprehensive understanding of health after reading I think Christopher Palmer's book. Like I've been plugging his book tons lately, because his book took what I did with metabolism and he took it a step further, and he made a very technical book on mental health and mitochondria. My like editors really wanted me to cut out a lot of the technical discussions of mitochondrial function. Like they didn't want to hear about Parkin, they didn't want to hear about like these different mitochondrial peptides and MOTS-c. They didn't want to hear about any of that. They wanted to hear about like, what's the big picture? But I really like Christopher's book because he goes into the actual mechanisms underneath a lot of mental health disturbances related to mitochondrial dysfunction. And I think if you can understand mitochondria, you can understand health. And it's just like such a fundamental like thing that like I'm now convinced that mitochondria are behind like every hallmark of aging, and that if we take care of our metabolism and our mental health and we take care of our loved ones, then we're going to live long and happy lives.
I think the research supports definitely what you're saying, right? Like those are some of the biggest heavy hitters.
Yeah.
So I wanted to talk about a little bit about how to optimize exercise and the menstrual cycle for women. You speak about those things in your book.
Yeah.
I wanted to talk about and maybe
let's talk about fitness and the menstrual cycle. So one of the coolest things I've learned and one of the challenges I've had is like listening to my inner wisdom of my menstrual cycle and like respecting it instead of just doing whatever I want throughout the month. So I used to just like one of the biggest mistakes I made in my biohacking journey was like trying to hit my personal best no matter what time of my menstrual period I was on. And I realized that I was like kind of doing myself a little bit of a disservice when I could actually take advantage of my cycle to optimize my fitness performance. So during the follicular phase, you have the most energy. You have the opportunity to really put out your best in your fitness. Like you sprint faster, you lift heavier.
Which phase is that exactly? I forgot.
It's so when you're menstruating, technically day 1 is menstruation. So during menstruation, you're at the very beginning of your menstrual phase. You're basically like, how do I put this? Like you're just kind of tired. Like you're menstruating, you're bleeding, you're not going to feel like amazing. You're just kind of like, okay, this is what it is. But by the end of your menstrual phase, like typically during the beginning of my menstrual phase, I do work out a little bit, but I don't work out super hard because I'm usually a little bit more like I want to chill a little bit more. But near the end of my menstrual phase, I definitely feel like I can get back into the gym and I can do really well in the gym. So like typically when we're at the end of our menstrual phase, we're actually in a more lower hormone phase. So our bodies, we're not men by any means, but they certainly resemble men more than they do when we have our higher hormone phase, which is later on. During your follicular phase is when you start feeling really energized again. You start feeling
and that's
like
after
right after
like
menstruation.
7 days. Okay, so right after menstruation is follicular.
So days 7 to
13.
7 to 13. So you just like you kind of want to achieve more. You want to be outward facing. You feel more, you're just like more outgoing, and your progesterone's still relatively low. So you can put on muscle really easily, and you really can make greater gains of strength. So I love strength training, and I tend to lift my heaviest weights and highest intensities in the beginning of the like during the follicular phase, during the 7 to 13 days. That's typically when I feel like I can accomplish my best performance in the gym. And then ovulation is day 13 to 15. And this is when I feel the most attractive. Like I feel like I look the hottest, and I'm definitely typically the horniest during this phase. But you feel more magnetic, you feel more articulate, you feel more energized, more creative. But you got to be a little bit careful because you have higher estrogen levels prior to ovulation. So there's a slightly greater risk for tendon injury. So you got to be like a little bit careful with like those power workouts that you're doing. And so progesterone starts to go up after you ovulate, which can slightly decrease your anabolic capacity. So you may or may not really feel like hitting it as hard in the gym. So typically during the luteal phase, I'm like not going for my personal best. I'm like, this is day 15 to 23. I'm like essentially I'm maintaining. And I'm trying to like do things that make me feel good, but I'm not like going all out in the gym. I'm definitely trying to train and do well, but I'm not like I'm typically going to do like higher reps and lower intensities. And then, during the late luteal stage, days like 24 to 28, this is when your estrogen and progesterone starts to decline leading up to menstruation, and your cortisol levels start to increase. So you get hungrier, you get moodier, you're more stressed out. Some people get PMS, like 50% of women get PMS. And I genuinely like, I don't, it depends on I really only feel PMS if I'm really stressed during this phase. So like, you already have higher cortisol. If you pour more cortisol into, a slightly higher cortisol state, you're going to feel a little bit more stressed out. But this is really the best time for things like yoga and Pilates and mobility work and recovery. I still do bike rides and long walks but I'm not going to like push it super duper hard during this period of time. Cause like a hard cortisol inducing workout is not necessarily going to make me feel amazing.
What phase are you in right now, if you don't mind me asking?
I think I'm in my follicular phase. I did a pretty
so you got
great,
a lot of energy.
Yeah, I mean, I am day 11. Yeah. So like
Day 11.
I did a nice bike ride today. I rode my bike for about 50 minutes. And I have an e-bike, but the thing about my e-bike is that like I'll still ride it for an hour, but I'll go a lot farther on an e-bike. And so I actually have worn my Oura ring, and my Oura ring is telling me if I'm in higher intensities. And I'm typically getting about 30 minutes of high intensity exercise when I'm doing a bike ride, even though I'm on an e-bike. But I'm like racing myself. I am having fun going fast. It's probably not the safest thing to be doing in the world, but I really enjoy riding my bike as fast as I can around this lake. And I don't like have it on the highest setting, but I just enjoy. I feel like I get into flow state when I'm riding my bike, and I like the way it feels to maneuver through the city. I'm not doing it around cars. I'm doing it on trails that are like for running and biking. But I was surprised that on my e-bike, like even though I'm assisted, I'm still getting higher intensity exercise. And I think it's because of the like the challenge of going so fast. So I do find myself like enjoying bike rides, and then like I'll go to the gym tomorrow and I'll do like a heavy lift.
Nice. What's your opinion of, let's say, I know this is like controversial, but what's your opinion of birth control? Is that something you talk about in the book?
I do talk about birth control in the book. Birth control is a really big controversial thing. And I was on birth control for part of my 20s. And then I went off of it in my early 30s because I was concerned that, I was like, well, what if I want to have a kid, So I am very much a proponent of natural cycles and Oura ring and using, learning about your body's ovulation. Because I really think that it's a great way to understand how your body works. I've used LH strips to see when I'm ovulating. And I also just think it's like really smart for women to have sex with men that they would consider having children with. Like that's a very kind of like conservative way. But like if you wouldn't be willing to have a kid with him, then why are you having sex with him? And that's kind of like an interesting way to think
You're
about
like,
it.
if all shit goes down, then
well,
all right, why not?
Also there's like a lot more personally, there's a lot more that like I don't look at penetrative sex as like the only kind of sex that I enjoy, right? So like I can have just as good, if not like ecstatic sex without having a guy's penis inside me. So like there's a lot that you can do that is amazing that does not require you to risk getting pregnant. So I kind of like tell people like, well, what do you do if you want to have sex? I'm like, well, there's a lot that you can do besides having sex. And they're like, but what if you're in a relationship and he doesn't want to have a kid? And I'm like, well, maybe do you want a kid? Like, so I just don't think people are thinking about this stuff. And like, here's an issue. One of my friends, she got married and she went off birth control because she wanted to start thinking about having kids, and she stopped having any attraction to her husband. And now they're separated. So like, this is a risk, like this is a concern. And so I'm going to use hormones when I go through menopause and probably perimenopause. But if I can avoid using them, like the biggest problem I see with hormones and birth control is like doctors prescribe them typically to help women prevent pregnancy, but also to help quote unquote regulate periods. And that was why I was on them in my 20s. And I was not regulating my period. I was ignoring the hormone dysfunction I had under the surface that I was covering up with hormones. So it made my personality flatter. It made me, I didn't have any intuition at all into my period and into my, and you lose that understanding of your menstrual cycle because it's just flattened when you're on birth control. Like your estrogen levels are flattened. And so I just found that like I had a better relationship to my body and understanding of how my body works by going off of birth control. But the problem with going off birth control is it can cause behavioral issues, mental issues. A lot of women I know have gone off birth control and had like major problems. So
Is that because they were on it to begin with, or just it happens to help with that stuff in certain people?
I think it's because they the hormone shifts were causing hormone changes change your brain. You know, like my mother went off of her estrogen and started getting depressed and irritable. And I asked her, I'm like, did you go off your estrogen? And she's like, well, my doctor won't prescribe it anymore because I'm like, you know, I'm too old. I'm like, Mom, like you need estrogen like to function. And I'm like, look, you're going to have to make a decision for your health. Like, yes, there is a slightly higher risk of breast cancer, but there's also a much higher risk of heart disease and dementia. So like, which one do you want to risk? You know, and this is the challenge of getting older is like, you do have to make some compromises of risks. You have to, and it's all dependent on an individual, right? I wouldn't necessarily recommend a woman with a BRCA mutation take estrogen.
Oh, you are? Wow.
No.
You wouldn't recommend a woman with,
I would not necessarily recommend that. Like, I think a woman with BRCA mutations are going to have to be a lot more careful.
I misunderstood. I thought you said you had a BRCA mutation.
No.
I misheard that. Yeah.
I don't have a family history of breast cancer, but I have a family history of colon cancer. So I got to be careful with things like bacon. I stopped eating bacon because I was like, I don't want to get, you know, I stopped eating processed meats as much as I can. I mean, occasionally I'll have some, but like maybe like once every month or so, I'll eat a piece of processed meat. It's not like every day. But
what
like
about red meat in general?
I'm not worried about red meat. Not for me. But I think I think it depends on a person's biology. So some people do seem to do better on more plant-based vegetarian vegan diets. Some people do better on more ancestral diets. I don't know how accurate the blood type diet is, but it's funny thing is that when I eat red meat, I feel really healthy. And I try to eat lean red meat, by the way. But I also I had a steak last night. I cooked it for a potluck. It was a really high quality piece of steak, and oh my God, it was delicious. It was really, really good. And so like I love red meat. I run a little bit lower ferritin levels, so red meat helps me.
Yeah, and women in general are going to have lower iron than men, so something they need to be. You
got to be careful with it, but I'm not. My beliefs on red meat have shifted a lot. I'm not worried about them. Maybe if I go through menopause and my ferritin levels get too high, I'll be more careful with them. You do got to be careful with oxidizing your cells, right? Like too much iron is not good for longevity. So it's about balance.
So let's talk about labs a bit. I'm curious about what you think is like, a good HSCRP, or if you don't mind sharing some of your results, if you remember them.
I have to look them
up. A lot of people don't remember. I would say the vast majority of people don't remember these numbers. And so if you don't know them any offhand, but
let's see. Well, so one thing to be aware of with these labs that a lot of people don't realize is your diet's going to change your labs. And so if you eat low carb, you're generally going to see a little bit higher cholesterol and you're going to see lower carbohydrate markers. So like my cholesterol is like 200, but I'm not worried about that. That's the upper limit of normal, you know. Triglycerides are 56. HDL is 80. LDL is like 112. So I'm happy with those, you know.
Those are good, yeah.
My LPIR score is like less than 25, which is the most insulin sensitive you can be. So I'm.
What's your HbA1c?
Oh, it's actually too low. I need to probably eat more carbs. I've been upping the carbs because I think it's a little too low. 4.7.
What is it? Oh, that is quite low. I haven't.
Yeah, it's like below the reference interval, so I should probably up my carbohydrates.
What about the HbA1c? Yeah.
Let me see. 5. So.
Okay, so it's always been on the.
Well,
that's 2000.
What we need to do is we need to go before 2017. We need to find something like older.
Like I have since 2012. I was saving my lab work.
Yeah,
I probably could get before that, but I never really paid attention till 2012. And I was like, I got to start saving my lab so that I can know in the future what's abnormal right? And so that's
Totally.
been super useful. The earlier you could
Yeah.
do that, the better.
I know. I'm wondering like how far back I can find them. Because it's like you would think that I would have more labs. Oh, 2014, maybe. That's not bad. All right. I don't think it was
You were
very good.
still into health, like you were still very health conscious in 2014
Yeah.
though, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
What would be interesting to see is like what happened before you even kind of
I
yeah, I
know.
guess yeah, well, before you really got into it, what was the baseline?
Where's my A1C? I mean, it looks like so 2014 was when I started wearing a glucose monitor. And the thing about my lab,
2014?
yeah. So,
Okay.
back then, I actually in my glucose monitor. Oh yeah, my hemoglobin A1C was 5.1. But my glucose monitor was regularly showing, that like now I think this was like when I was in 2014. I remember my glucose monitor was regularly showing that like my fasting glucose was like right below 100, and my postprandial glucose would regularly go above 140. So like I started really changing my diet around then because it was clear that I had some insulin resistance. I felt like I had some issues then. But I mean in general I'd say that like I've always had pretty high HDL. I think that runs in my family. My triglycerides definitely, because I eat low carb, they're always going to be fairly low. But the thing that a lot of people have been so obsessed with is lipids for so long. It's like lipids are dangerous. It's like we're really learning that it's a lot more dependent on blood sugar metabolism and inflammation and oxidative stress than just lipids alone. You can't just look at lipids and be like, you're healthy or unhealthy. Of course, if they're super out of range, that's something to be concerned about. But the bigger question is, are you insulin sensitive? Like that's something that's really a big question for a
For
lot of
sure.
people.
For sure. I think all those things are relevant. Have you seen specific studies that people who are insulin sensitive but have high cholesterol, what their mortality is like?
I don't think that we have that research. I really don't.
Right.
I
That's kind of where the problem comes in.
that is a problem. Yeah.
It's very hypothetical, and it's whatever your opinion is really like whatever,
Yeah.
it's like some people say that, oh, well, it's insulin sensitivity, and that
Well,
could
it's
very
something
well
you got
be,
to
right?
metabolic syndrome is metabolic syndrome, right? So like
Right.
metabolic syndrome is low HDL, is high triglycerides, high waist circumference, typically because of high visceral fat, high blood pressure, right? And like this is like the bigger predictor than anything for somebody developing, metabolic diseases. It's just like, do you have metabolic syndrome? Like that's been well studied.
That's for sure. I agree with that, right? If
Mhm.
you're overweight, if you got a lot of
Or not even
inflammation,
overweight. Like some people are skinny
right,
fat. So body
right,
composition is far more important than there's a lot of people people don't, this is a big misnomer. So there's people who are metabolically unhealthy and obese, but there's people who are metabolically healthy and obese. And then there's people who are metabolically healthy and not obese. And then there's people who are metabolically unhealthy and not obese. And those are the skinny fat people. So those are the people that have a
right.
gut and have a higher waist circumference, but they're still in normal body BMI range, but they have high visceral fat levels. So like this is a lot of people that are being overlooked by doctors because they look healthy on the outside, but if you actually look on the inside, they've got the wrong fat location. The fat's in the wrong place. And
Right.
visceral fat's what really gets you because that's what damages the organs.
For sure. I've read studies where that's even worse than being fat.
Yeah.
Like if you're skinny fat, and your risk for all different kinds of issues are could even be higher than obese people.
Yeah. I mean, there's literally so many people out in the world who are struggling with health and they don't even know it. And that's the thing about prediabetes alone. Like one of the big things I talk about in the book is this epidemic of metabolic disease. And the fact that there's like literally 1 in 3 people in America with prediabetes and 80% of them do not know it means that there's a lot, and I'm talking millions and millions of people who are insulin resistant, who are on their way to getting metabolic diseases, and they just don't know. And that's why I recommend wearing a glucose monitor because your labs won't always show it.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And that's obviously not including like there's all these kinds of statistics where it's like, 1 in 7 have some form of kidney disease and they don't know it. They're,
Wow.
and yeah,
That's
it's
a lot.
that is a lot. It's 15%, literally. I mean, that's the CDC's number, not mine.
Jeez.
Yeah,
I mean,
it's nuts, right? And that's
that's
just like
probably due to undiagnosed, metabolic disease damaging the capillaries and of the kidneys. That's a big issue.
that could be part. Yeah, that's a big part of it. And then there's obviously all different kinds of cardiovascular disease, cancer brewing in people. I mean, I don't want to
Mm,
scare people, but that's why I think health is such a growing field right now.
I know.
I remember. Do you remember 15 years ago where it's like, how many people really paid attention? You were like a weirdo if you were
Oh,
too
I
into
mean, I
health.
definitely would. My family treated me like I was a black sheep, and they
Right.
were like, "Why are you constantly complaining about the food system and health? And like, why do you care so much?" I'm like, guys, someday you're going to get it. You're going to understand what I'm talking about. And now they come to me for advice and now they get it. And now they're watching the healthcare system kind of like fall apart at the seams. And they're just like, oh my God, I'm so understand why you don't want to work in there. And it's like, no shit. Like it's just so much disease in America and so little health. And it's destroying our country. I mean, it literally is causing enormous problems at mass scale. And it's due to our food and our lifestyles, and it's all preventable. Most of it's preventable. I'd say 80% of 80% of the diseases I saw in the hospital were preventable.
Yeah, I think 100% of the metabolic diseases are pretty much preventable.
Probably.
I
One
mean,
of the
yeah,
things
I
that we
would.
forget though is that like children don't choose their families that they get born into, like you all the hippies will say you chose your parents. Like no, you were born to two parents, like, and you emerged.
Right.
And you don't really choose your upbringing, right? And so as a result, a lot of people do. I just finished a paper I submitted to Frontiers in Psychiatry on the relationship between metabolic health and mental health. And one of the things that's really changed my view on health is like, of course, we do have agency and free will over how we feed ourselves, but there's quite a lot of conditioning and programming happening early on in life. And if you grow up in a family that doesn't teach you how to eat properly, if you grow up in a family that abuses you or neglects you, it's going to change your nervous system. It's going to change the wiring of your brain. It's going to change the way that you respond to stress. And it's going to change your capacity to handle different stressors as an adult. And so I think a lot of people self-medicate with food and substances like alcohol and cigarettes and vape pens that will damage your metabolism. And they do that knowing it's not healthy, but they do it because they're doing it as a response to coping with stress and coping with trauma. And that's what's changed a lot of my worldview a bit, is like I'm a lot more compassionate to people who are obese because I actually see it as a protective mechanism. I see it as a protective
And
mechanism where people are trying to protect themselves from the pain that they're experiencing internally that they don't know how to cope with because they weren't given proper coping skills. And this is only going to continue getting worse as kids are taught to emotionally regulate with technology.
right. And I think in terms of trauma, I think that's why psychedelics are so big now, because
Yeah.
that probably is the best way to kind of reset that trauma
Maybe. I
over.
used to think that when I first started out in the space. I mean, I built a psychedelic company and I definitely am bullish on psychedelics, but the more that I learn about psychedelics, the more I realize that they're just like any other tool in the toolbox. They're going to work for some people, but they're not going to work for everybody. And not everybody's a candidate for them. So, for
For
example,
sure.
ketamine assisted therapy is a great tool, but if you have seizure disorders, you shouldn't do it. Like it's going to potentiate a seizure. And if you have psychosis, you shouldn't do it. I know I had a friend who has bipolar, and I said, do not go do ketamine therapy. And he's like, I'm going to do it. And he did it. And he ended up with a massive psychotic breakdown. And so like,
Wow.
do these things work? Yeah. For the right person. Should everyone use them? Absolutely not. They're not for everybody. They definitely can be ridiculously effective for things like addiction. I've had friends who've literally cured their alcohol addiction through one single psilocybin trip. I had a friend who was
Wow.
suicidal in high school, one single psilocybin trip, and he's never been suicidal again. I had an ex-boyfriend who was chronically suicidal his entire life. and he did 12 days of ayahuasca in the Amazon, and he is no longer suicidal and he's thriving. So yes, can these help? Oh my God, for sure. But should you be very careful with how you approach them? Oh my God, of course. Like I tell people, you got to choose your shaman like your neurosurgeon, because people have been damaged by psychedelics by using them inappropriately. And so I'm like, I'm not gonna walk out and be like the cheerleader of the psychedelic space anymore, because I was definitely a bit of a cheerleader initially. And then I just started seeing casualties just like anything else. And I'm like, damn it, if people are irresponsible with their minds and the way that they go about using these things, they're going to get hurt. So it's just as important for you to like do tons of research and lots of homework on these before you go and take them.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, there's definitely with anything that I mean, obviously, self-decode is all about personalized health, and everybody reacts differently to everything. So I'm obviously a huge believer in that, and I would agree 100% with what you said. With anything, there's going to be a different response to it.
Right.
There's only a couple things that really everyone's going to do well with it on some level or another. That would include exercise and sleep, right?
Yeah.
Movement and sleep is just, those are fundamental. Question is, what is the ideal movement for you? How do you get to sleep but other than that, it's all going to be pretty much personalized. Yeah.
Another really interesting drug that's very controversial, that's really taken off in America, is ketamine. So like I write about this in the book because it's the only legal psychedelic that we have. And I do think that sublingual ketamine has utility. And I do think that intramuscular and intravenous sometimes has utility. Like it's one of the only drugs we have that we know can abort suicide. Like we know that people will reliably not kill themselves if they are suicidal and they go do ketamine instead. So that's different than things like SSRIs, where people will, there's a black box warning on SSRIs for teenagers because they found that it increases suicidality in kids. So that's real, like that's a real issue. Some people do become habituated to ketamine. Unfortunately, it does have the capacity to cause ketamine use disorder. So we can't say that it's perfectly safe. And then there are a lot of people who get it on the street and it can be cut with things like fentanyl. So ketamine has risks. And people who abuse street ketamine are the most likely to end up with bladder damage. I've actually met one person who ended up with ketamine cystitis and was like peeing blood. And so it's not perfectly safe for the kidneys and in the bladder. But it is something that I've seen help people eliminate anxiety and improve depression and help with PTSD, and it's being used for that in America.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I also found this interesting study that showed when you take rapamycin with ketamine, the antidepressant effects are much more significant. So they have a synergistic effect.
I mean, I would guess that's due to BDNF and neuroplasticity. That's a big reason why ketamine does its work, is through improving neuroplasticity and improving BDNF in brains that are chronically stressed. So, and reducing, and then there's like the NMDA receptor antagonism. The weird thing about ketamine is that it's an analgesic, it's an anesthetic, it's an antidepressant, it's an anxiolytic, and it's a psychedelic. So it's like a really weird drug. It does so many things.
Right.
I had last year was a extraordinarily busy year. And the way that I try to teach people about health is like, health is kind of like building a bank account, and your ATP is your money, right? And so you have an opportunity to like build health into your body and build greater capacity to handle stress. But at the end of the day, there's going to be times and places in your life where you're going to spend more health currency. And last year was one of those years for me because I was finishing a book. I was fundraising for a company. I taught at Stanford. I moved. I went to Antarctica and did a fair amount of travel.
You went to Antarctica. Wow.
Yeah, it was cool. And then, and so, and I was just like building a company and finishing a book, marketing a book. And it was just too much stuff. And I was advising like 20 companies, still seeing patients. Too many things, right? And so I think I got a couple colds last year and COVID because I was genuinely overdoing the stress level. Like I know it because my cortisol was high. I measured it. I saw it. But the cool thing about health is that you can always, like, especially if you're fairly young, you can do a fair amount of recovery. So this year is like, once this book is done being published, it's like all about balance and harmony, and just like creating more space in my life to just like focus on the projects that really matter. And not do it all at the same time like I did last year. It was just too many things all at once. But it's good to challenge yourself, because when you challenge yourself, you actually you test what you have in terms of your resilience, and you actually learn how to become stronger in the face of stress. So I'm like, I definitely don't regret any of last year, but I definitely am not trying to continue this year into like with the same level of output and capacity, because I did learn that there is a limit to how much I can actually put my body under. It was great to learn that, because now I know. But I think it's really key for us to take those inventories occasionally and like really look at our lifestyles. And like last year, I was like, you know what, like I think my lifestyle affected my health a little bit. My lab somehow still stayed pretty strong looking, which is good, but my mood shifted a lot by the end of the year. I definitely felt like if I didn't take a vacation, I was gonna be, I'm not gonna be in a good state. So I went to Puerto Rico for a couple of weeks, and that made a big difference in my mental health. And I also learned, I did some really interesting neurofeedback technology that was pretty interesting.
Wow, I want to get back to that. I love that you check your labs, for example.
Oh yeah,
I think I don't think people realize that it's kind of like having a company. You run a company and you don't check revenue, right?
Oh my God, that's a great way to think about it.
It's like you're trying to manage your body, which is one of the most important things. You're the CEO of your body.
Yeah.
Right? And you have to control all these things. There's all these measures of success. Whether you come down with a disease, if you come down with the disease, you failed, right? If you on some level, right? I'm not saying you're a failure, but on some level you failed. If your mood is not good, on some level you failed there. If you're at high risk for a disease, or if your blood sugar is high, there's ways to check how these things are. Like the bottom line is, you want to live longer, you want to prevent disease, but there's ways to check how you're doing with those things beforehand. And I think with genetics also, with especially with the polygenic risk scoring in genetics, you could also see where your weaknesses are in, like, okay, I've got this weakness in these areas. This is where my risks are. This is what I'm likely to be deficient in. And,
I measure everything. I measure my Nutraval. I measure my Nutraval is actually, do you ever do Nutraval testing or urine organic acid testing?
Not really. So I'll tell you, I just had a guest on, Tommy Wood, MD. He's MD, PhD. I don't know if you've heard of him. He's been working on this stuff for a really long time.
Yeah.
And he came out the other side of the rabbit hole thinking that they were bullshit for the most part.
I don't buy it at all.
For the most part.
No.
You think they're legit?
100%. Yeah. Oh my God.
Okay.
Like, I've been using them for my entire career. I think to say that urine organic acids is bullshit is a really bold claim. And
well, that's what he says. I don't know enough about the top.
See, he's an MD?
I've MD and a PhD. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I find it to be really, really reflective of my overall health. Compared, like me in my 20s, my Nutraval in my 20s look totally different than my Nutraval now. And I think it's a testament to all the changes that I've made in my lifestyle to improve my health. I feel much healthier now than I did when I was younger. One of the things that I would also consider is, like, I'm not looking at urine organic acids alone. So I'm looking at them in the context of regular lab markers, qualitative history, person's environment, what do I know about them? So you really can't look at this. You have to take an omics approach. So if you just look at the biomarker alone, you're going to miss the big picture. And this is part of what you learn as becoming a doctor, but not most doctors don't even know how to do this, because most doctors are still only looking at blood markers. But when I'm taking these data into account, it's not like I'm looking at a single biomarker on its own. I'm looking at it in the context of a person's history, their functional history, their medical history, their environment, their other labs, their complaints, their problems. And so it's like, does this give me information that can help me understand them? But it's not like I'm necessarily using them to say, like, you have this problem. And, like, it's more like for example, I'll look at a stool study and look at urine organic acids, and I'm going to see that there's consistency on multiple levels. This person has complaints with gut issues. They've got urine organic acid changes. They've got stool study problems. There's probably dysbiosis in their gut. That's how I approach this stuff.
Right. So I think you're using it in a very sophisticated way.
Yeah.
And I tend to think that, I agree. You also need to look at genetics in a somewhat sophisticated way, right?
Exactly.
You can't just be like, you've got this gene or you've got this predisposition, therefore it means this. You kind of weigh it with other available evidence.
Well, that's the thing about genetics, right? Yeah, we thought genetics were like going to answer everything. Turns out that they're like maybe only responsible for 10 to 20% of longevity. And so, of course, if you have a genetic condition, you're going to have problems. But a lot of people carry a lot of random genes, and not all of them matter because not all of them are expressed. So what we're learning is that you can't just look at these things in isolation. You have to look at them in the context of the big picture. And that requires a lot of high level thought. And what I love about what you guys are building is you guys have really tried to help demystify a lot of this stuff for people and give people at least some access to, work that's already been analyzed, because it takes a lot of time and effort and many hours to learn all this stuff.
I want to ask you if you ever take nootropics in order to help you learn this stuff.
Nootropics are certainly something that I've played with. My big issue with a lot of nootropics is that they have, they're very, like, some of them make you feel the same way that stimulants do. And so I have just learned that I don't really like feeling overstimulated. But I do like, boosting different systems in my brain depending on what I need. So I definitely read the book, The Mood Cure, early in my career. And I have taken like the Braverman assessment, and I generally have, I think these are like the sort of surrogate measures for brain function. But, there's a really great book that just came out called Brain Energy. And I'd say that, like, alongside my book, The Spark Factor, these two books alone are going to give people a pretty good primer on mitochondrial function and mitochondrial health. So my perspective on brain health has changed a lot. And it's not really about necessarily always having to use tons of different nootropics, but actually figuring out, like, what's really going on in the brain. Is the brain hyperactive or hypoactive in different regions, and why? And I definitely will. I think caffeine is like the number one nootropic used in the world. I'll sometimes use a little bit of it. My friend has invented this thing called paraxanthine, which I've played with a little bit this year, which is basically a byproduct of caffeine metabolism that seems to work better for people who aren't fast metabolizers. So it's a really interesting new sort of nootropic version. I would call it a nootropic because it definitely affects the brain. It's a little bit more dopaminergic than caffeine, which is cool. I like saffron. I guess you could maybe consider saffron a nootropic because it does modulate dopamine. But I really like that for mood and just like general focus. So those are the big ones that I'm taking. CDB, choline, saffron, and I've tried huperzine A in the past, but I stopped using it, but I might try it again. So I do like, I'm kind of a fan of cholinergic based nootropics. I never really caught on with the, like some of the more popular ones that like Dave Asprey would recommend. Like I'm trying to think of the names of those.
Aniracetam.
Yeah, the racetams never really worked for me, so I just didn't do them. What are your favorites right now?
So just to go back on what you said, I actually take paraxanthine now.
Oh yeah.
I take it. I like it better than caffeine. I find it's way smoother and doesn't have the same. It's not as long. Like caffeine, I really have to take very early in the morning, or else it disrupts my sleep.
Yeah.
Whereas paraxanthine, I could take 3:00 or whatever, and it won't damage my sleep. Thanks for coming on, Molly. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, and I would highly recommend the Spark Factor. That Molly goes deep into a lot of the topics we discussed and a lot of topics we did not discuss. So definitely recommend getting her book. Thank you for coming on, Molly.
Thanks for having me.
Hope you enjoyed this. Please subscribe, please like, please review, whatever it is, YouTube you like, iTunes, review it. And this way I will do more of it if I see that people are really liking this stuff.